Well, welcome. We're glad you came. Thanks for being with us. Ever since Bobby called, I've been roaming around in my mind trying to sort together all that happened back in 1990 to 1993 with the new construction. And so I thought it might be useful to have some other people come. And that's why I really invited Bill and Harold to be a piece of this, because they were really heavily involved in that, both the financial end and the construction and design change that we made in 92, 93. One of the issues, of course, we had faced just talking about this issue was, Dick, look, we just put a sanctuary in 1960, and that's just like 30 years ago. So why so soon do we have to make a change? And that was a fair question to really ask. I mean, I thought one we should really think about. But I think one of the reasons that the 60s, you got to remember the 1960 sanctuary right here was built 10 years after the last major addition, which was the educational wing that extended east from the chapel. And the chapel was the only place Derry had for worship. And I don't know what the seating is in there, what, maybe 150, I would say would stuff that place pretty well. And when that's the only sanctuary, a new minister comes, that always gives everyone a thrill for at least 5, 8 years anyway. I mean, people were coming, and the need for a new sanctuary was sort of in everyone's face, even though it was just 8 years later from when that chapel addition was added. But when I arrived with this sanctuary, there were a number of issues that I discovered and heard along the process that I thought we need to at least think about. One issue was what I termed as I thought about the issue was steps, steps, steps. Any of you who were here in 1990 and earlier, you know how many sets of steps there were. Bill and I think Harold knows this, and some of you know what this room was. This was one of our 2 fellowship halls that we had downstairs. There was no fellowship hall upstairs. On the other side of that wall was the kitchen for the men's breakfast that was held every Lent. That's when I was introduced real quick to that. On the other side of the kitchen, there was a second fellowship hall, not as big as this. I'm not sure that this isn't a little bit bigger than it was at the time. Maybe we shoved things a little bit more that way, because the real addition we did in 1990 created the office area. It included the nursery upstairs. That whole area got pushed out further. So maybe that was a piece of what happened in this. There was also, some of you remember, a stairwell that went up in this, from this corner, there were steps going up that would take you up to the chapel. If you also remember, outside there was a two-level concrete set of steps. They were big between the manse and the sanctuary, and that's how you entered into the upstairs and to get into the sanctuary. There was also a set of steps when you came out of the sanctuary and came downstairs to the fellowship hall. If we could con people into, please come down and let's greet one another, do something. And those steps came out, my recollection is, in that closet area. On your way out, we transformed those set of steps into a storage area back in that way. And there were things, there was another closet area back in there. I don't know. There was stuff in there that I don't think anyone knew what it really was. I mean, just stuff, things got stuffed in there. So we cleaned that out and changed this area outside. But there were others. So the whole step issue, anywhere you went, even out of the sanctuary to come this way, my recollection is you went up 2 or 3 steps to get up in that main hallway, which ran between the sanctuary and all those classrooms upstairs. There were those steps, the steps outside. There was also a handicap accessible ramp, concrete ramp that ran on that side, the Mansion Road side of the building. Problem was for people to get down to the fellowship hall, if they had any kind of accessibility issues, they couldn't use those steps. To get the handicap ramp, well, it created space, but people would have to walk around the front of the church, and that's all grassed area, to get back there, or else they had to go out and walk down along the back parking lot to get to that. So if you're handicapped, if you've got some handicap issues, you really have a problem here, okay? The second thing, and I remember this when I was interviewing with the committee and reading their church information form, one of the issues that jumped up at me was the concern about drawing people into the church. And there seemed to be concern that people don't come easily to Derry Church. There was this feeling that in the writing and in things people shared with me, some sense that people here weren't as friendly as they could be. They weren't as welcome as they could be. So when I got here, for me, I quickly learned that wasn't a people issue. People in this church, in the years I've been around, have always been as welcoming and friendly as any other human beings, maybe higher up the list. They were really interested in welcoming people. But in my experience in the church I was at in Texas, and just doing some reading about it, I really had become convinced that architecture can really make a difference in how people welcome one another. It creates space for people to bump into one another, create fellowship halls that are easily accessible so people can get to greet one another. That whole kind of concern to foster greeting. So, that narthex upstairs between the choir area and the fellowship hall and the kitchen, we tried to expand that space. It used to be, I think, about 6-8 feet wide. That was it. Well, it's bigger now, and it runs a lot of areas. And when you're going from the choir to the chapel area, well, you gotta run through there. And other people are going to the nursery, and they got to stop, and maybe they'll say hello to one another. Maybe they'll stop and talk a few minutes. And I think architecture can really foster that in the lives of churches. So, and I think, as I told Bill and Harold, I wanted to show this a little bit. For those, many of you, were you here when this 1960 sanctuary? I see a lot of nods. You're probably very familiar with this. One of the when I knew it wasn't people, I wondered what the architecture dynamics, is that causing us some problems? Well, maybe you remember this. We're standing in the back. This picture was taken from the back. Oh, you're getting that a little closer. This is from the back of the 60 sanctuary looking forward. You see the chancel up front, 2 rows of pews, same pews we have today. That area is probably just about the same width across. Maybe the length is even the same. But what I really noticed quickly when I got to this church was how things shaped after morning worship. And we basically had, I think, 3 groups of people. Now remember, this back was the exit. The exit for the sanctuary, the main exit, faced East Derry Road and Mansion Road. So people would stream out that way. It was not a large narthex out there. It was relatively small, but that's where people passed through to greet the pastor and greet one another. But there were 3 groups of people. The first group would stand right in the middle of that center aisle, about halfway between the chancel and the back door, and they would stand there and talk to one another for about, 15, 30 minutes. I mean, I'd be doing things and come back through and they'd still be in there talking. There was a second group of people who would leave the sanctuary. And remember, you had to go up some stairs on this side. And those were usually young families who were leaving the sanctuary to pick up their children in the nursery. You remember where the nursery was? Susie, where do you think?
Back down there.
Well, yeah, and even further, I mean, the quilting room, yeah, I think still available. You go down the steps near the chapel and you're in there. I remember the bathroom going down those stairs. I had kids testify to me, they never used that bathroom. It scared them to death going in there. It had the step going up to the commode. You remember that, the concrete step? But it frightened a lot of young kids growing up. And also back in that quilter's room, you had the steel door that went into the boiler room. As I told Bill, I was in there once or twice and the door shut and I about freaked out. I mean, it was like all those movies at Christmas time where the furnace is scaring kids, you know, from Home Alone. I could identify with that. But that was, if you think for parents, and when I was in Texas, let me tell you, if you didn't have good nursery care that was visible, you wouldn't find any adults under 40. You just, I mean, and so these adults, as soon as the last hymn was sung, they'd be burning to get back down to the chapel area and go down and pick up their kids, and out that door they'd go. So no greeting there. The third group was usually officers who went out this side of the sanctuary over here, because that's where all the officer mailboxes were. Remember? So everyone split as soon as the service was over. And I think the changes that we made fostered people to take time to greet one another. I mean, think what you run into when you come here to church and that narthex area outside. I mean, it's hard to get into the sanctuary in time because people are greeting one another. The access, the easy access to the fellowship hall. And I mean, it didn't take long after that construction that Marie and I would just, in working with new member classes, what really struck you about this church? And I will tell you, overwhelming, every single class would be people saying, I have never been in a friendlier church in my life. Everyone welcomes us and makes us feel like we need to be here. Boy, is that important for church. So I think there were things that happened, just sort of some architectural kinds of needs that helped turn a corner and make things that tended to be a bit of a negative, or at least looked at that way, as to something very helpful in the life and the growth of this church. Let me stop with that, Bill, I think, and maybe, and Harold, maybe you want to say some introductory things.
Well, our architect has a time constraint, so
okay.
I'll quickly introduce. Once Dick got the congregation momentum moving toward correcting all the issues that he just discussed, we retained an architect, Charles Douglas Huffman, who was noted as a church architect, who came here. He looked at the schemes, or he looked at everything that Dick just described in terms of flow of people. And he came up with a proposal which would basically create, and I have a drawing of this, which I will share with you. Okay. Let's see, we want to get to this one. Okay. If you look at this, it shows, first of all, the sanctuary gets reversed. This area right here is this area up in here. And so the sanctuary gets reversed. This becomes the main entrance. This becomes the narthex. And then over here is where the manse used to be, is the fellowship hall. And so the church put together a building committee. John Zerby was the chair, Harold was the vice chair, and they looked at a variety of Huffman's options and opted for this. And so then they retained our company to oversee the development of the project, and using nepotism, we hired our son to help get us through the process of the design. The concept was, and we went out to get what was called a design build construction contract, where there would be an architect, but the architect would work for the contractor. And the purpose of this was to try and eliminate conflict between the architect working directly for the owner and the contractor working directly for the owner. We would only have one person to deal with, the contract. So we went out, we got 3 proposals, and we selected the Horst organization from Lancaster, and their architect was a Charles Marsh, who was a Lancaster area architect who had a significant amount of church experience. And we got to our first job conference, and this was the scheme that the committee had approved. And my son was at that meeting and was reflecting on what this really looked like. And at the second meeting, he comes back with some suggestions. I'm going to turn it over to him to explain his thought process as to how we got to what we have now. Chuck, can you take over?
Sure. Thanks. So yeah, I mean, this was.
Me to keep this. Do you want me to keep this slide up, or?
Yeah, I think that
Okay.
for now, yeah, I think it's fine. At some point, it probably will confuse people once we start talking about what we ended up doing. If you actually allow me to screen share, I do have some hand-drawn drawings that they're not the final drawings, but they're close. They're kind of what I had come back with as a counter proposal. But I need to be allowed to share.
Okay, participants. Okay, you should be able to share now.
Yep, okay. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's hard to believe it's been nearly 30 years. And for me, probably 42 more churches since I did this one. But I had a supreme advantage in that I was a wandering soul as a younger kid in that building and knew every square inch of it, inside and out, from youth group, from, hiding from my parents to try and avoid going to worship, all of those kinds of things. And, had, through the study of architecture, had, kind of come to appreciate sort of the blending of the new and the old, and very comfortable kind of dealing in sort of modern architecture that's simultaneously referential to historic architecture. And I always hated that 1960s sanctuary for a number of reasons. One, it was kind of an A-frame. So, the picture you have in front of you, the roof was oppressive. It came all the way down to a very low wall height. I'm sure you all remember the pastel stained glass windows that precluded you from looking out to the beautiful grounds. It just was overwhelmingly dark. It was also set up in a way that kind of referenced more of a kind of high church design. The pulpit was dead center. It was massive. It kind of blocked There were no steps down the middle. So it kind of said, you know, the preacher's up here and you guys are all down there, and there's no connectivity. There's no, and everyone's looking at the backs of everyone's heads. And so when the plans were sort of shared and I was looking at them, I'm like, well, this doesn't really fix any of that. It just simply reverses it. And in reversing it, it creates all kinds of other connectivity issues, because you're basically sending anyone who's participating in a service, be they the choir or whatever, they're either marching down the center aisle or they're having to go all the way down the basement corridor and back up a back set of stairs. So it seemed to make more sense to keep, well, the other thing too is then the choir and the organ would end up in the back as well. You know, in playing around with it, what seemed to make a lot of sense was to try and get people more kind of around worship, you know, sort of a more communal type of space, which, you know, given the existing structure, ended up leading to sort of the cruciform. Well, guess what? We already had a precedent in that, because the original chapel had a similar organization. So a lot of the sort of initial moves, including creating sort of an aisle around the periphery, which is sort of this, allowed us to bring the walls in and get a higher sense of definition to the space, which relates more to the chapel. You know, basically, you know, working with Dick, which of course I couldn't call him that back then, because I was too young. You know, we couldn't get big enough with the chancel, which I think, you know, I think it even ended up further out by the time we were done executing the design. And again, that idea of sort of everyone being around, and then sort of the generosity of the stairs, the connectivity of the stairs wrapping the whole way around was really important as well. And we've had a lot of fun over the years with furniture and everything else, sort of, you know, taking that idea and pushing it all the way in terms of how the chancel area really works. We brought the choir down from above. There were definitely some, you know, some growing pains as we sort of figured some of those things out. But the other thing was sort of, it became the game of, all right, so if this is the big move relative to the sanctuary, how do we solve all the other problems? In particular, things like the accessibility and the connectivity of all the other spaces. And then of course, also, you know, where's the social hall? Well, one of the things I had always observed was that the classrooms that were located in this area had really, really high ceilings. I mean, they were beautiful classrooms, but, you know, just sort of looking at the footprint that they occupied, it became pretty evident that that would make a pretty good social hall, particularly since it was sitting on top of the previous social hall, which had a very low ceiling height. And so essentially we just tore the roof off, added a little bit of height, and put a new roof on top of it to create the social hall, which was ideal because it was directly across from the sanctuary. I think, you know, as Dick was saying earlier, and as we find in a lot of the churches that we work with now, a lot of these older churches literally were designed to say, you know, come worship and then go away. You know, none of them had any real lobbies, any real sense of, you know, kind of the social aspects of people coming and using the building. So we did the best we could in yours. It's a little linear. You know, nowadays, you know, we meet with congregations and sometimes the lobby area is bigger than any other part of the church because it is kind of the central court that allows everyone to gather. But, you know, it seems like it still works at Derry, but certainly the ability to flow right into the social hall, you know, helps take some of that pressure off when you have, you know, people staying. So that was another kind of important piece of the design. And then the rest of it was kind of filling in all the pieces from using the grade and the off-hill condition to, create a back entrance that kind of logically comes in by offices and provides vertical connection between the upper and the lower floors. And then, piece by piece, it was just kind of making sure that the rest of the building is, to the best that we could, was upgraded and would continue to function in its support roles. I think, some other kind of fun little aspects too were the old hallway that used to be kind of right here to the classrooms had beautiful stained glass. The length of that corridor always seemed to be, kind of underappreciated, if not, not seen by most people. So we basically took all of those pieces of stained glass, and there were some that we basically found stained glass everywhere that you didn't really get to appreciate. And then we strategically used them, on key axes in order to make sure that you were, getting this kind of, I think we did them here and here, basically just suddenly bringing them into play as important historical pieces, as well as kind of, connecting the past and the future. We also had a lot of fun with art installations. Wonderful having such talent, in the congregation to be able to kind of complement architecture. I mean, Mark is really great, and I loved some of his installations, and it again is sort of, past and future. When you think of the art that adorned, the old cathedrals. So it's fun that Derry, has that same kind of connection to art and architecture. If I had to do all over again, I'd probably come up with a very similar plan. I think it has stood the test of time. We've certainly, we're old enough now, we got to renovate it. And even the renovation was, I think at this point now, 10 years ago. So it just goes to show how time passes. Ironically, we did this particular project about the same time I did the chapel over at the medical center, and we're going to be finishing out in the next 4 weeks or so a brand new chapel in the courtyard at the medical center. So we're old enough, I guess, to be tearing down our own work and rebuilding it. Anyway, that's basically, as I recall it, the process and what the thinking was.
Any questions for Charles before he signs off? Okay, you'll have to get us out of screen share.
Yep.
But thank you very much for
Sure.
Yeah, and I can be here for about another 15 minutes till I have to hop off.
Okay. You might tell the group what you have to do at 10 o'clock.
Oh yeah, just another church presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an accessibility project for an older church.
Hey, Bill, I just like to affirm a little bit about what Chuck said, and it made me think as he was talking, 3 reactions overall. Certainly one was the chancel. And I remember someone saying, Dick, does the chancel have to be that big? And I tried not to be smart. I said, yeah, it really does. We couldn't make it any bigger. We used all the space we could. And so that was the end of that. But there was also, when it got built, I can't tell you the number of people came up and said how much it meant to them that for the first time in their lives, they went to church, they could see other people's faces instead of the back of their heads. I mean, I think just that dynamic changed just how, again, the whole greeting, friendship, fellowship aspect. Second thing was when that fellowship hall, when the roof was raised in the fellowship hall, and I remember that Sunday or maybe the next few Sundays, people would just wander through the construction, staring up in the air, saying, I can't believe we have that much room here. And we really did have that much room. I mean, it really helped a lot. And the third thing, I think, from what Chuck says, that we were enabled, I like to think, of doing more to this building than we ever planned on doing. And so many people who would come to Derry for workshops, so on and so forth, they weren't necessarily members or in Hershey, but they were visiting the renovation for the first time. And they would come up to me and ask and said, Dick, I thought you were just making some sanctuary renovations. Did you rebuild the whole church? I mean, everything in the church looked new and fresh, not just one area standing out. And I think Chuck really helped us do that. I mean, and some of it was just coats of paint that members of the church did themselves. I mean, we had crews doing some of the classrooms. So it really made a bright difference and a welcome attitude. So
The size of the chancel
One thing-
is very popular.
oh yeah, that was a goal.
Like
Yeah.
singing groups.
Yeah, exactly.
Just think how many groups we have accommodated. We've had nearly a full orchestra. We've had bell choirs, guest musicians. We've made a lot of use of that chancel. And at the early on, we thought, man, that's really huge.
Chuck, you were going to say something?
Well, I was just saying, when we debuted the, finally moved back into the sanctuary, I knew we couldn't fail because everyone was sitting in folding chairs in the multi-use room for quite a while during the summer. So I think, we basically forced everyone into a different lifestyle because it used to be so staid and so quiet. And when you were in the fellowship hall, worshiping, it created chaos with kids coming and going and noise, and it changed the dynamic of worship because the activity. And then that was something that I think we were a little worried about because we were connecting from the chancel end, people coming in, and even though we sort of have the aisles that loop around, people can see and be seen when they're coming and going. And those who remember the old 60s sanctuary, if you had to go to the nurseries or to the bathroom or whatever, you were front and center. You basically walk down. And that was, something that was kind of an oh no situation in the prior sanctuary. But I think the dynamic which changed from the temporary housing by the time everyone moved back into the new sanctuary, it was a much more animated, lively, kind of worship time. And I think that's, remained.
Okay, well, what happened after these first couple conferences, job conferences, the committee, and by the way, I just thought you might want to know who was on that committee. A lot of names that you may remember from the past. John Zerbe, as I said, was chair. Harold was vice chair. Nancy Einsel, Mac Achel, Blondie Ferguson, Chuck Asphalt, John Shepard, John Russell, Bill Spinagle, Leslie Horn, and Neil Rose. So some are still with us, some have passed, but it was an active committee, and it took about 3 or 4 job conferences before they had 100% endorsement of this new concept, totally eliminating the Doug Huffman concept. The architect, Charles Marsh, then with Chuck's participation, prepared the drawings, and this process started in the beginning of 1993 and went through to August of the year of 93 until we got a design completed that we could get a building permit. We got the building permit and we started construction in September of 93. Now, one of the issues that we had to confront was the budget. The original budget we thought would be about $1.7 million. When we got the design completed, we had a criteria that the contractor would have to bid at least 80% of the project. And there would have to be 3 bidders that we would approve. We went through this process and we were about $2.1 million. Just to get to the end of the story, the final project cost was a little bit in excess of $2.3 million. So we had to pay for this. So Harold, why don't you discuss how that took place?
Harold showed up at our doors, right?
It was sort of interesting how the financing took place here. We were working with Hershey Bank, and Hershey Bank, we were looking at a $2.4 million mortgage and 7.95%. And everything was going along. We were running parallel with the construction, so it was important. And all at once, I got a phone call from Denny Fingers with Hershey Bank. Said that now that they had been bought by PNC, they had a new committee to look at mortgages, and they didn't think that we had a viable mortgage. They wanted to see 1 year of giving before they would give us the money. Well, the year would kill us. So we had a special committee set up under the building committee. And we came up with the idea if we could get bonds would be acceptable to PNC. So I asked them, if we sold $300,000 worth of bonds, would that be acceptable? And they said yes. So I went to McNeese Wallace in Newark, and I had some friends there, and told them, we wanted to set up bonds, and they said, well, they'd give us an intern, so it wouldn't cost us as much. And they went through with a promissory note. There were restrictions on the note, mainly to get into the right government. I don't know if it was AUC or what it was, but we had to avoid that. So the restriction at first was only the session by the notes. And then they relented and they said only the congregation. So with the congregation, we went out with a note. The notes were 7%, which was a good rate. But when you look back at that time, the best rate you could get on investment was coming out of money market. We're picking up 6.5%. So we put 7% on this, and rather than 300,000, we sold almost 400,000, and that satisfied them. We went ahead with a $2.4 million mortgage. I think we only ever drew 1.8 million, mainly the bond sale, because there were people that just turned in the bond. They didn't cash them in. They just contributed it. So in the end, we got our money, we got our building, and all was happy.
If it's any consolation to everyone.
This was a $50,000 bond. Most of them sold in $50,000 to $75,000 area.
So as a frame of reference, the presentation I'm going to give in about 10-15 minutes is basically an elevator and a vestibule and some changing out some lights. It's $1.8 million.
Timing is everything.
Yeah, that's right. Bill, Harold, any other recollections you all might want to share?
Yeah, there is one. And it was part of the building committee when we were looking at this. And Chuck came in and he had a model. I mean, an intricate model of this thing. And when he lifted the roof off the fellowship hall, I think that changed a lot of people's minds when they were looking at it. It was a great model.
Yeah.
I will, it's not really germane to the success of the project, but the one The one area that we really had a problem, I don't know if you remember this, Dick, the roof. The final contract was signed the 19th of October in 1993. And there was a series of adds and deducts that we had accepted. And one of those was a deduct of $47,000 to change the roof shingles on all sloped roofs from synthetic slate to Grand Manor shingles by a certain heat. And that was a deduct of, as I said, $47,000. There was another one to change the roof shingles on all sloped roofs. See, I'm trying to figure out what the difference is here. Oh, it was another project, it's another material, a Timberline Ultra 40-year shingle, which was a deduct of $65,000. And we accepted the $65,000 deduct. So the contractor, Houtz, hired a roofing contractor who installed this Timberline Ultra 40-year roof. And within a year and a half of completion, that material failed. And it failed everywhere, not just on our roof, which resulted in the manufacturer declaring bankruptcy. So there was no recourse for the church to go against the manufacturer to correct the roof. So we then actually had to hire an attorney, and we sat down with Houtz, who was the contractor and who was the design. And here's where we had the advantage of having the design and the construction all in one contract. They were responsible, and to the credit of the Houtz company, they had no recourse against their manufacturer. They made good, and were willing to go back to the synthetic slate that we had originally approved for the roof. The church then at that time, because, as Harold said, the finances were working out better than expected, John Zerbe said, why not go all slate? And so we paid the difference between the synthetic slate and the total slate. And that's why we now have a slate roof over everything. But it was the Houtz credit. They stood up for their responsibility, and it's just sort of a footnote to the story. But every time you look at our roof, it's a slate roof.
There was one other thing with Houtz. We're working with them, and it came time to sign an agreement, and they weren't signing. We didn't get it. We didn't get it. We didn't get it. Finally found out they weren't gonna sign it because there'd been an error in their bid of $150,000. So we had a meeting with Houtz, and Abe Houtz was there. And we agreed to split the difference, 75-75. But Abe Houtz was tremendous to work with. Matter of fact, to the end of the job, in the sanctuary, they had to scaff the whole way up to the roof. And the estimator left the cost of the scaffold out of his contract. And still, Houtz never shortcuts. They did everything first class.
I think at two periods, and maybe you all have some questions too. I sure want you to ask if you do. I remember for me the toughest moment in that construction. I think it was the summer after we began that construction. Family and I coming back from vacation, first Sunday in worship. I think it was the week before the roof had come off the sanctuary to build the transepts. And I think we had at least a 24-hour or longer rain. I mean, it was just everyone totally depressed by that situation. I mean, the pews were gone. We moved the pews out. Boy, that's another whole story. Somewhere out on 81, a warehouse out there, we stored all the pews, and we did the job of carrying those. I think it really picked up when they saw the fellowship hall, even though the roof was gone, something was going to be really exciting and different was going to happen there. And I think the third thing that was really kind of an exciting time is when we were finished and entering the church on a Sunday. And I think it was Friday or Saturday. Mary, and I know you were there. We had a whole crew of church folks. We did our own construction cleaning after it was over to get the church ready for Sunday morning. I mean, vacuuming, dusting, you name it. It was a huge and exciting process where, I don't know, 20, 30 people. I mean, a lot of people showed up to help. So there was some real energy once, going into that new life with the sanctuary. And any questions or thoughts?
The very first Sunday that we came to church here, we were meeting in Fellowship Hall. It was October of 1994. And you said that the next Sunday we would be in the new.
It was getting close. Those were some exciting days. I know, and to get the fellowship hall ready, I think we had 3 services on Sunday morning in the chapel. I mean, I was so sick of that sermon by the time I got through it. I mean, twice is enough, but 3 times, I mean, oh, Lord.
I'd like to make a comment, 2 snapshots in history. 1986, Karen and I were going to get married. We were in search of churches in the area. And we came here and not one person said hello. And we said, we're not going to attend this church. You talked about the different groupings. It was like they were paying attention to themselves. They had other things to do. So newcomers weren't really communicated with. We ended up at Pine Street. That's where we got married. And then later on, we ended up in moved to New Hampshire, North Carolina, came back in '94. Now this is 8 years later. And we said, we should give Derry another try because we live in Derry Township. Totally different. And even though we were meeting in that, like Karen said, the folding chairs, we saw people were very friendly, very outgoing, totally different. 2 snapshots in time, 8 years apart. So I think what you were talking about, the ability of being welcoming and communicative, approachable, was a real critical feature in the church.
And I think some architecture can help make that happen.
Oh, absolutely.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Fairly early on in the construction process, didn't we have a really heavy snowfall during the winter?
Yes, we did.
Close to 20 inches or thereabouts.
Thanks for bringing that up. All I remember is Harold had some kind of steam gizmo and dragged me down here with him to steam out. We were afraid that something was going to break or fall down. I don't know. I don't want to think what could have happened.
I have,
I've got to say goodbye.
Well, Chuck, thanks an awful lot. Best to your family.
All right, take care.
Good.
this is another footnote. I have the minutes here of the dedication committee that started meeting in November of '94. And it consisted of Matt Gagel, Helen Anthony, David Birch, Janet Birch, Barbara Blankenship, Don Chubb, Reed Edwards, Ann Geis, Jim George, Dick, Mike Kenny, and Jim Latham. But for Greg Harris's benefit, one of the activities they wanted was to get Sussman. Sing. I don't know exact date of the dedication. I don't remember, but I know it was before May 5th, 1995, because our daughter got married.
And I'd like to make one comment on that. Dick gets up before he marries them and says, you know, I knew this sanctuary would be finished because Beth's getting married.
I think that was the first one, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Sure.
what?
I think it was. Yeah, that's right. Gee.
Committee chairs met with the building committee on one Saturday. Somebody said, put a basketball goal at one end. Harold said, put one at each end.
We had one at each end. I had to make a little deal with Horst. A little swap.
Well, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Very,
Thank
very
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you bet.
Thank you very much.
You bet. It was an exciting time and it's fun to watch a church kind of evolve over time. Just architecturally and just socially. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Harold.
Thank you.